I'm Nick Ireland, a retired RAF pilot.
So Nick, how did you become interested in aviation?
Shortly after the war, I was living with my parents in a big house in Hampstead, and we let the top floor to a man who worked at the de Havilland factory at Hatfield. And after a while he brought me a few aviation magazines back, which I looked at, and it sort of started from there. A magazine that I think is now long gone called The Aeroplane. He brought back numbers of that or things from his office, and I looked at them, and it really started from there.
So when you first got that magazine, how did you feel? Was it a burning ambition to be in the Air Force?
It was really an interest in the contents. In those days they didn't have computer-aided design, and there were marvellous whole double-page spread cutaways done by draftsmen of aircraft, and I think it was the sort of technicalities of the construction and things that rather appealed to me initially, rather than the thought of flying. But I went to school, I went gliding, then I got this isn't for you, I'm telling you. When I went to school, I went gliding, learnt to glide, went solo, got a flying scholarship, which was 30 hours training during a summer holiday to get a private pilot's license. But before I did that, I'd done this thing for the flying scholarship, the RAF scholarship, that gave my parents money to help me continue at school to qualify educationally to be in the Air Force, to join.
And was that a necessity to have that education to get into the Air Force?
You had to have 2 A-levels in relevant subjects, and I did. I got them.
And what year did you join the Air Force?
1958.
And how long was your training from when you first joined or got accepted?
3 years from joining to graduating with my wings fully qualified, ready to go and learn to fly something else at an operational conversion unit. It was 3 years, and for the first year the pilots did navigator training in a flying classroom, an aircraft called a Valletta, so that in the second year, if they flunked out of pilot training, they could fall back to being navigators without having to be recoursed. So I did a year learning to be a navigator, a year flying piston Provosts, and a year flying Vampires. And at that stage I suppose I'd got maybe 200 hours on my wings, and that's what I graduated with in December 1960.
So the first time you went up in a jet, what was that like?
Well, actually, I went up in a jet from school. I was given a special trip at West Raynham when I was about 16, and I remember being very sick, but it didn't put me off. It put the pilot and the ground crew off, but it didn't put me off.
So, when you first went up in your first solo flight, how did you feel? Was it exciting?
Well, yes, it was a milestone, and I was confident because I'd been well trained and they wouldn't have sent me if I wasn't up to it. And that was in a glider when I suppose I must have been over 16, a schoolboy. Well, I got this flying scholarship and I went to Luton Airfield, which was before it even had a concrete runway, and I had 30 hours flying in a Tiger Moth with an instructor, and it was a 1 month, I did a month in school holiday with a chap called Ted Sessions, who was a nice old boy instructor, and I did my 30 hours and passed my tests and got a private pilot's license.
So when was your first time on a Canberra?
I started training at the Operational Conversion Unit at Bassingbourn in 1961, January or February, for about a 6-month course. At Bassingbourn there was quite a fleet of aircraft. There were the 2-seater T4s for pilot training, and then once the pilots were actually qualified and fit to go solo, then they went either to the bomber variants, if that's what they were going to do. And they had some photo reconnaissance cameras called PR3s, which were fairly old but perfectly safe and could give one the rudiments of learning to fly survey and aerial photography.
And what was your role as a pilot with the Canberra?
I was trained for photo reconnaissance, and that was the job that I did in Cyprus for nearly 3 years, in flying the PR9, which is a high performance variant of the Canberra.
If you could just expand a bit on the PR9, what was it like to fly and what were its characteristics?
Well, it was an extremely pleasant aircraft to fly, all Canberras are, but this was quite different from the original ones. It had fully powered controls, no manual reversion, there was no manual backup, it had a bigger wing, it had bigger engines, it could go higher, and it had a full fit of cameras for doing survey work or reconnaissance, depending on how the cameras were fitted and arranged in the aircraft.
So what was the original role for the Canberra?
The Canberra as an airframe was a light to medium bomber, and then variants came from that, the PR variants, and the PR9 as a more specific reconnaissance variant.
And how many variants did you actually fly yourself?
Two sorts of two-seater, and the training one, and the PR3, 7 and 9.
And out of the ones you flew, what was your favourite?
Well, it would have to be the 9. It was a fine aircraft, lots of equipment that the other ones just didn't have, an autopilot, a sort of auto approach arrangement, and it was just very nice to fly. We did quite long trips in it, 4.5, 5 hours. The autopilot came in useful, which the poor bomber people didn't have.
What kind of camera did the PR9 have?
It had a Swiss vertically mounted camera called a Wild, spelt W-I-L-D, and it has a fan, that is to say cameras that point slightly off the centre and further away to make complete coverage almost horizon to horizon when you're doing survey or reconnaissance work. Particularly, it's possible to fly along somebody's border and get pictures scores of miles into their country without going into it and violating their airspace. And that was quite a lot of what we were doing flying out of Bahrain on the first occasion when Kuwait was threatened by Iraq, which was in 1961, and most people have never heard of or forgotten about. That thing's been on the boil for quite a while.
So tell us about your missions you did in Africa.
Well, from Bahrain we had to go up once a day at staggered times so as not to be too predictable, about an hour's transit up to the Kuwait border and fly along it with the border on our left, looking in, not with our eyes, we were too high, but optically with the cameras, and going home. And basically the photographers, the photo interpreters, looked at the pictures to see had they changed from day to day. Was there a runway being extended or new trucks arrived on airfields? So it was more comparison than a straight look at one day's photographs. They looked at a week's and compared them.
And with planning for these missions, was it very detailed or was it on the spot, let's go?
Oh no, it was pretty much a standard sortie, and different crews flew it and they knew where to go, when to turn, what to look at. There was no radar there was no risk of us being shot down, we hoped. But the Royal Navy had a destroyer up in Kuwait Bay, and when we flew up, they just gave us a test call on a radio frequency. And if we didn't hear a test call or the radios had failed, we heard nothing and we just went back home. So it was fail safe.
How long were you based over there?
We did it as a 1-month detachment from Cyprus, 2 crews. Then later on it actually became a detachment. There were 2 aircraft of the squadron permanently based there, but the crews rotated.
So how many crews would there be?
We had 8 aircraft and 11 or 12 crews, as I recall. Might have only been 10.
Were you always stuck with the same navigator?
Yes, where possible.
And what was the navigator's main job?
Well, he had to get the aircraft to the right place at the right time, obviously. And it was very difficult because some of the work we had to do, we did a complete survey of East Africa when it was still called Kenya, Tanganyika and Uganda. And we had to fly 200-mile, 30-minute straight stretches in a straight line of photographs which had to overlap, and then you had to turn around and come back up a parallel line, and the photographs had to overlap left and right as well as fore and aft. And it was jolly difficult to do in the middle of East Africa, where a town doesn't come up every 50 miles. It was a big trick, and in fact we sometimes missed it and the overlap didn't occur, and then we had to go and fly another sortie just to patch the gaps. East Africa was nice, but the flying was a bit boring.
How long was an average mission or sortie?
4 hours, except going up to Kuwait and back was more like 2. But we could do 4, and if there was no time constraint, we had to go surveying things. We flew for as long as we had fuel. But 4 hours plus some transit, maximum 5.
And there was no in-flight refueling capability on the camera, was there?
No, never has been in any mark that I'm aware of.
So what was the maximum flight ceiling of the Canberra PR9?
You could get it to about 60,000 feet, but it wasn't actually terribly manoeuvrable up there. And we didn't often go there because there was no reason to. We had the capability and we had the clothing, the flying equipment to go up there and be safe, but it was very rarely used.
Could you tell us a bit about the equipment you used to fly with?
Yes, we had to have what amounted to a pressure suit, but it wasn't like you see the men going to on the Saturn rocket. It was a 3-part thing made up basically out of the anti-G trousers that fighter pilots wear, which could be inflated by air to pressurize our lower bodies. We wore a sleeved jerkin, which was also inflated by air and pressurized our chests, and we wore a special helmet, a Taylor helmet, which was made to measure for each pilot basically, and that kept your head safe.
Was there any special requirements to be a Canberra PR9 pilot?
Not as in terms of how you flew, it was more a question of your character traits. Did you want to be a rip the wings off 30-minute sorties hunter pilot, or were you a bit slower and steadier and could work with the navigator without frightening him?
And did you ever want to fly anything else?
Well, you get 3-year tours. I'm never that keen on single seat. Perhaps I like the company of a navigator.
And in the flights, in missions or sorties, did you communicate constantly, or was it only when needed?
Really, it was only when needed, unless we were in a long transit really bored, in which case we might be discussing Arsenal against Manchester United while monitoring the instruments. When I finished in Cyprus, I was posted to the Central Flying School as a student so that I could become an instructor. And we all did basic flying, actually how to become an instructor on the jet Provost. And the Air Force had a very good system. Basically, you sit in the aircraft, an instructor teaches you how to do something. Next time, you go up with another student and he teaches you how to do the same thing. And then you go up with another student and you teach him, and finally you go up with the original instructor and you do as what we call it a give back. You teach him what he taught you 2 days ago, and you do that for up to 20 or 25 different lessons. Tried and tested, but pretty heavy on manpower and flying time.
And how often did you do it? Once a day?
Usually twice, particularly in the summer. You lose flying time in the winter for the weather, so you have to make up for it when you've got sunlight. You're not even stuck with 9 to 5, it's more like 8 to 7. I learnt to fly it, which was challenging in some ways, and then I went to Valley as an instructor, Valley in Anglesey, and I did 2 years there as an instructor. Relatively advanced. The aircraft had the instrumentation, or some of the instrumentation, of a Lightning, in it, some of the instruments, the flying instruments. It was a complicated little aircraft, great fun to fly, fairly unforgiving. We had quite a lot of accidents, but I survived, and so did most other people.
And how manoeuvrable was a Gnat compared to the Canberra, for instance?
Well, very, because it was designed to be. There was a single-seat version of it called the Midge, which was sold to Finland and India as a fighter.
So why didn't the UK use it as a fighter?
Well, they were still getting by with Lightnings and Hunters and waiting for, well, in the end we got Phantoms. Valley was very busy. We had 60 aircraft, of which we got about 40 out on the line every morning. The unfortunate ground crew had to work 24-hour shifts in the hangar to get 60 aircraft out every morning, or try to, because they often finished up the day with 35 to 40 broken in some minor way. We had 2 squadrons of flying there, and mostly one squadron did the mornings and the other squadron did the afternoons. It was nearly a year before my wife found out that I didn't have to work all day and all the afternoon. I used to hang around on the squadron I didn't fly with, getting formation leads or air tests and things, and 1 year I got just over 440 hours in 50-minute trips, which is actually, I wouldn't say it was hard work, it was fun, kept me busy.
What were the differences between the Jaguar and the Gnat that you flew?
Well, the Jaguar was actually designed to be, or at one point considered, as being an RAF advanced trainer instead of the Hawk, and they realised it was very complicated and 2 engines, they didn't need that. And the Jaguar was more modern than the Gnat. Again, some electronic aids, no radar, quite good long range, underpowered, certainly in the initial build. In Oman, where I flew them, we actually had uprated engines, and they jolly well needed to be, because it was a lot hotter there. It wasn't very much fun to fly in hot weather. Needed a very long runway to get airborne with any load on it, bombs or rockets.
And the aircraft you flew, which did you feel the power in the most?
Oh, the Phantom.
So that was probably the best experience you would say with taking off?
Well, I used to once or twice take, I was asked to take people for trips, sometimes journalists or pilots of other types of aircraft, and you could get the thing going along at quite a good speed and then just pull the stick back and light the reheats, and you could get to 10,000 feet to 30,000 feet. It felt like a minute, it might have been a little bit more, sitted on its tail. Passengers were well impressed.
What was the first time you went supersonic?
Actually, you could go supersonic in the Gnat, in a fairly steep dive, merely to demonstrate the possibility of it happening to students. It could never happen accidentally.
And was this abnormal practice for the RAF, or was it for the pilots or the thrill?
Oh no, the Gnat could go supersonic, and we had to show them what it was like, but it wasn't very natural. It was done in about a 30-degree dive from 30,000 feet. The Phantom would go supersonic in a slight climb.
So overall, did you enjoy your service with the RAF?
Yes, very much so. It was a good thing to have done. In fact, I told you I'd left at 18-year point. I actually went back in after 17 years out doing other things, went back into the Air Force and got another job instructing on Bulldogs at a university air squadron.
So all your family must be very proud of you as well.
Yes, I think they think I'm a bit crazy, but then it's not just them.
So we've got a few personal questions. Do you have a favourite tipple?
Well, I have 3 really. I like a good Rioja, I like gin and tonic, and I like not dry cider.
Do you have a favourite TV show?
Well, right now, because I don't understand it, I really quite like Dynamo. Magician Impossible. How does that work, I have to ask. He's a lot cleverer than me.
Do you have a favourite food?
Yes, I very much like nicely cooked calves, liver, onions and the trimmings.
What do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, when I can afford the petrol, I go out for a drive in my convertible car, if it's summer, and I keep in touch with my family and even my Canberra navigator, who is still alive. I'm a social beast.
And we've got a few questions from followers on Twitter. Can you go to the toilet in a Canberra?
Yes, would you like me to describe it basically?
Of course.
Okay, better not do number twos. Not easy, no toilet fitted. It is possible to get the necessary pipework out of your flying suit and pee into a specially provided plastic bag which contains either a sponge or granules to absorb the noxious liquid, and you fold it up and put it away and throw it in the dustbin when you land.
Have you been to any air shows this year?
Yes, I went to Sywell, and I would be going to the open day at East Kirkby, where they have the third Lancaster, the one that doesn't fly yet, but I'm doing something else on the one day of September that it's there, but it's a very good display. I recommend it to anyone who is in Lincolnshire.
What is your favourite aircraft of all time?
Looks or to look at or to fly?
Aesthetically.
Probably the Constellation. That looks lovely. Thank you for watching.